Hello everyone, my name is Korosh Erfani. I am the writer of the book Infinitylogy with the subtitle Foundation of a New Discipline. We started to make a lecture of this book and during 9 parts we passed in review the foreword and also the introduction of this book, and from the part 9 we started to make a lecture of the chapter 1 of this book. The book is available on Amazon and you can have the direct link on our website, the crdi.com. The CRDI is the website of the Center for Development and Research of the Infinitylogy, and we have a section books where you can find all the books that we already published on infinitism and also Infinitylogy. So in the part 9 we started to make the lecture of the chapter 1, and the chapter is dedicated to the general principles of infinity. So in this chapter we are trying to establish what could be the most basic, most fundamental ideas about the infinity according to the theory of infinitism. The theory of infinitism is a theory according to which everything is infinite. So nothing can exist if it's not infinite. So if infinity is the reality of everything, we should be able also to deal with that, right? So in order to do so, we need a discipline that know how to understand, how to see, and how to deal with infinity. And that's why we created a discipline that is under construction, of course, is called Infinitylogy. And this book, Infinitylogy, Foundations of a New Discipline, tries to give you the most basic ideas about infinity, and also how we could create, how we could establish a discipline based on these principles. So that's why we are making a lecture, and during this lecture we read the book, and I provide any further explanation that could seem necessary for a better understanding of what is said in the book. So we started chapter 1 of the book with the title General Principles of Infinity, and we went through the first part, which is about the matter, right? And we presented several assertions that are in this section, and we arrived to the idea of the last phrase that we read together, and I explained it was infinity is the endless reproduction of finites by infinites, right? Which means that there are the infinite process that are being reproduced, and they are giving birth to the finite, to everything, and this process is endless. Now we will keep going with the lecture of other assertions of this part. The other one is any finitude contains infinitude running in its structure. So we can imagine that everything, any phenomenon, could be seen as a finite or finitude, and inside of this finitude you have effectively something that is infinite, and this infinite or this infinitude is running, is functioning in its structure, right? And the way that it is running there is effectively the core object of the Infinitylogy. We want to know how, if we consider everything as infinite, how this infinitude is going on. That's why our definition, you will see later, our definition of infinity is effectively infinitude in action. So infinitude is something that is going on, that is acting within the structure of any finite, right? And that's why we have to understand how it's running, how it's functioning, how it's going on. And all the details, principles, rules, laws of this functioning, of this function or of this process is effectively the subject, the main subject of infinitology. So infinitology is the knowledge of infinity, right? And we want to know how it's going on within the structure of matter for any phenomenon. The other assertion says more or less the same thing. The finitude of matter is an expression of the infinitude of its structure. So which means that anything that we can touch or we can understand, we can perceive by our sensory, which means that we can see, we can smell, we can taste, we can hear, or any other form of taking perception of something, of a finitude regarding the matter, regarding the material world, is just an expression of what's going on inside its structure, right? And inside its structure, what is going on is infinitude. Something infinite is going on within the structure of everything, and this is what is interesting for us. So what we are seeing, what we are observing, and what we are working on as the finite, as a phenomenon, whatever it is just an expression of something that is infinite in its structure. So we understand that we cannot deal materially with the infinite, right? We can just deal with the finite, but we can have an understanding and comprehension and apprehension of the reality of this finite thing, which is, this reality is infinite, right? Or this reality is infinitude inside the structure of the finite thing we are dealing with. So that's the idea. Everything that we will add to the details of the discipline infinitology will be based on these rules, on these principles. These are the fundamentals of this new discipline. The idea that everything that we can see from just something under our microscope or on our telescope, the big one or the very small one, everything is just an expression of infinitude of its structure, infinitude in its structure. That's the idea. Let's continue by saying that infinitude is the endless interconnection of finitudes. So if someone asks us here in this assertion above, the finitude of matter is an expression of the infinitude of its structure, someone can ask us, what does it mean, infinitude? What we mean by infinitude of its structure. Here is the answer. Infinitude is the endless interconnection of finitude. So, which means that when we say structure of a finitude, in this structure, what we have is also the finitude. We can say, for example, we have the micro finitude, the smaller finitude. That's why we talk about the component and the subcomponent, for example. But what is interesting is that through the interconnections that are happening between these smaller finitude, we have effectively the infinitude of these bigger finitude, right? So any phenomenon contains in itself the infinite structure, and this structure is composed of the finitudes, and these finitudes or these finouts are interconnected. And because you saw in the assertion we use the term endless, and because these interconnections are endless, we can consider that as infinite, right? So the idea of the infinity is effectively what we have inside of a finitude, as the endless, as the uncountable interconnections between the finitudes of its structure. So you can see that how the principles are growing, the extent of the meaning, the extent of the cases, and are completing each other in order to give us an idea about what we are talking about. Finite, infinite, finitude, infinitude. So what does it mean, each of them? What they mean in general. So we have more and more precision. We have more and more details about the terms and the concepts that we are using in the frame of this discipline that is under construction, that is called Infinitylogy. Let's see the next assertion. The infinitude of any finite is the endless interconnection of its components. Here you see that we have a more clear, clearer definition of what we said above. So in the above we said that infinitude is the endless interconnection of finitudes, and here we said that infinitude of any finite is effectively actually the endless interconnection of its components. So which means that any finite has components, and these components are interconnected, and these interconnections are endless. So these are really the basic ideas of what we can find in the matter, in anything material, and if effectively we can find how inside of these details something called infinitude is running, then we have the first stone of our construction for a new discipline on infinity, right? That's the idea. Now, look how easy is understanding the next assertion based on what we said. Each component is itself a finitude, right? This is a retake of this idea, right? That any finitude of matter is an expression of the infinitude of its structure. Here we said the same thing. Each component is itself a finitude, and each finitude is infinite. So it's as easy as that. When we know that the structure of matter is made of components, we consider each component as a finite, as a finitude, and we know that each finitude, without any exception, is infinite, right? So in this way, we are, building up our theoretical frame in order to understand this complex topic, this complex subject of infinity or infinitude, right? We can see that when we start to break it down to the details, and we try to formulate the rules of these details, we get a better understanding of what could be considered as an objective understanding of the infinity. We add that each component represents a finite structure, right? So these are somehow the synonym, right? Component, finite, finite, component. So we use interchangeably these terms to express what we want. Each finite structure is a set of infinitely continuous substructure. So whatever is the take that you have, whatever is the phenomenon you take as the finite that you want to study over, you have a structure that is a set of continuously infinite substructure, which means that not only the substructure are continuing to exist, but it continues endlessly. It continues infinitely, right? So this is a set of infinitely continuous substructure. Any structure that compose a finite, any material phenomenon, right? So you see that somehow in these rules that we are enumerating and presenting, there is somehow a kind of iteration or repetition of the ideas in the different terms, but it's not a logo machine, right? It's not just for the sake of saying something, even though that we know that it's a repetition. No, it's using the different terms for the same ideas, and sometimes using several ideas for the same term, for the same word. Why? Because we are establishing something. We are creating something that didn't exist before. We didn't have so far any formulated, organized, structured knowledge about infinity. We didn't have that. We have a lot of literature regarding the infinity, from the point of view of philosophy, mathematics, physics, and so on and so on. But we didn't have a discipline dedicated to infinity itself. And that's why we don't have any idea about how it can go on inside the structure of matter first, and if it is changeable, if we can operate over that, if we can modify that. We don't have any idea, right? And Infinitylogy, based on the theory of infinitism that says that everything is infinite or is not, tries to create the grounds to establish, to found this discipline. And from the moment we have it as formulated, as organized as a discipline, for example, as an academic discipline, we can start to see what could be the usage of this discipline. That's very interesting. So the idea by which I want to maybe terminate this part, because we try to have the videos that are short and you can effectively come along with, is this one. Each component is infinite, right? We said that. And look at this. Matter is the never-ending iteration of infinite interconnected finites. So you see that the structure of our definition and the elements of our assertions are growing, are taking more and more body, right? Why? Because we have to bring more precision to what we are saying. So that's why the assertions get more and more complex, and with more element, with more sometimes ideas, and with more terms and words. So let's read it again. Matter is the never-ending iteration of infinite interconnected finance. So let's see the elements of this definition. First, it's a question of matter. So we are talking about everything that is material, everything that we can touch, everything that has mass and takes a space, for example, as is defined in physics. That's the first point. So what is this? How we can maneuver, how we can have an idea about the ontology of the matter, on the being of the matter. So here is the first idea that we are suggesting based on the fundamental assertions so far. Matter is the never-ending, which means that you can never find a point that can be considered as end, as the final point of something, So is a never-ending of what? Is the never-ending iteration, which means it repeats itself, it reproduces itself, right? It's remaking itself, never-ending iteration of what? Of infinite interconnected finance. Look, here we said that each component is infinite, and if someone wants to know how it is infinite, we said already that we mean a set of infinitely continuous substructure. And now if you want to get a close look to this substructure, you can see that it's a question of the never-ending iteration of infinite interconnected finance. Finance that is a component, right? Here we have a clearer and simpler definition of that. Matter is the iteration of infinite interconnected structures. So these are the structures. We can call that microstructure or substructures or nanostructures, whatever it is. They are interconnected and they are uncountable. They are infinite and they are repeated. By iteration, we means that at any level you can find something, the same thing that you have already found in the upper level. That's the first part of the meaning. And the second is that whatever you find at a given level, you will find the same thing in the sub-levels, right? So upper level, sub-levels. And that's it. That's the idea of the iteration, which means that it's reproducing itself. It could be with a lot of variety of process and mechanism. We will explain it later. But the idea, the main idea here is, by the word iteration in this definition, is the repetition, is the sameness of what we can find in any level of a structure in the other levels of a structure. Is the same reproducing process. That's the idea. That's why we said, again, I know that is a kind of repetition, iteration, but it's not redundance, right? That's an effort to establish the idea, to set the idea up. So that's why we said also the same ideas in other terms, in other formulation. Matter is the endless iteration of infinite interconnected components. So if you want to have an idea about the ontology, about the core, the substance of matter, here you have a conceptual idea of what it is. The endless iteration, repetition, reproduction of infinite interconnected components. And what's interesting is that whatever is the level of the structure of the phenomenon you are studying, you will find the same thing. These are just, the different scale of the subject. Otherwise, we are talking about the same thing. these are the components that are interconnected. So what are inside of each component? The same thing, interconnected subcomponents. What is inside the subcomponents? The same thing, interconnected subcomponents, or interconnected micro components, interconnected nano components. And what is interesting is just this point. This process, this thread, this course is infinite. It goes infinitely, which means at no part, at no point of this search inside the structure and substructure of a phenomenon, you can find something that we can call final point, ending point. It doesn't exist. It's endless. It's iterative, it's an iteration, it's a repetition, but this repetition is forever, is never ending. And what is interesting for the theory of infinitism and also the discipline of infinitology is exactly this, the idea of not having any point as the starting point in the absolute sense, absolute meaning of the term, and nothing as the ending point. It's an ongoing process in any direction that you want to study. It can goes from you can go over the past or over the future. You can never find this process stopping, right? And you see that at any level of the structure of a phenomenon, of a finite, of a finitude, of a component, the different terms that we use to present this idea, the same thing is happening, the interconnected components. And then when you go inside of one of these components, the same thing. One of the subcomponents, the same thing. One of the subcomponents, the same thing. Interconnected elements, interconnected structure. So that's the basic idea of infinitology regarding the matter. And from the next video in the part 11, we will go through the what we call universe. And we will see what is one of the expressions of matter, which is what we call the universe, right? So we will see that the principles, the laws, the rules are going in the same way, with the same logic, with the same rationale, with the same process, as well in the matter as in the universe, as one of the manifestations of matter, one of the expressions of matter. And what's interesting is this universal character of these rules. They don't accept any exception. They don't accept any, we can say, particular case. Whatever is the subject of your study, you will find, as long as you have to deal with matter, you will have the same rules, the same laws, the same principles. And that's why we can consider that as a discipline, because a discipline should be organized. It should be extrapolable. It should be generalized, right? And it's because we found that in the particularity of this foundation, the principles in everything, absolutely everything, and that's why the theory of infinitism says that everything is infinite, that we call infinitology a discipline, right? A new discipline. It's true that it's a discipline under construction, but it means that it can become effectively a discipline as an academic discipline like any other one in the field of science, for example. All right, we will continue in the next video our lecture and we will go through the part that is entitled on the universe. Thank you very much for this video. If you want to know more about what we are talking about, you can go through one of these three websites, www.infinitylogy.com, infinitism.info, and also through the Center for Research and Development of Infinitylogy with the website www.crdi.com. Thank you, and see you for the next video. Thanks. Bye.